Zohran Mamdani remained unfazed when he said it. It may be true that Barron is not Eric Adams' biological son, but the real impact came when sealed judicial documents began to back up his claim. You could feel it through the screen. Something was brewing. The audience of the Oversight Committee hearing on presidential abuse had already been delayed by an hour. Most viewers weren't paying attention until Representative Zohran Mamdani leaned forward, took off his glasses, and called for silence. Not from the room, but from the noise of tradition. His tone didn't rise. It lowered, somehow making everything sound louder. I want to shift this discussion towards something that speaks directly to character. He began staring at the panel as if already knowing the fire he was about to provoke. Some committee members shifted in their seats. Chairman Ruben Geller visibly tensed. Mamdani was no longer following the script, at least not the one that had been agreed upon. This country has spent years protecting power over truth, and that ends today. Some ironic laughs, a couple of raised eyebrows, but he continued. Methodical, deliberate. There is a set of sealed documents from an Arizona court in 2019. Documents protected by legal maneuvers and, more importantly, buried by political influence. These files involve then-Mayor Eric Adams, a former employee, and a child. Now the silence took over the room. I have an affidavit from a federal contractor. She handled the digital destruction of files marked under the White House Correspondence Protection Act. One file was different. It referred to a payment of $3.1 million to a woman under the alias TV. The only unredacted phrase paused while flipping through a photocopy. The camera zoomed in. Paternity agreement executed under confidentiality. DNA confirmation pending. Representative Matt Overby tried to interrupt. Is this really the moment? But Mamdani didn't flinch. The people didn't vote for secrecy. They voted for representation. If the mayor knew during his first term that Barron Adams wasn't biologically his and buried that information to protect his image, we have a problem that is not only legal, but moral. The room was no longer just an audience, it had become a national combustion. CNN interrupted its programming to broadcast it live. MSNBC followed. Even Fox didn't change the channel. Phones across the country lit up like warning lights. Clips on TikTok spread within minutes, all with the same text. Zohran Mamdani just said that Barron Adams is not Eric Adams' son. Inside the room, whispers turned into chaos. Overby slammed his pen against the table and called for the session to be adjourned. Mamdani raised his voice for the first time. We will not silence the truth just because it discomforts the powerful. We're not talking gossip. We're talking about justice manipulated for personal protection. Ryan Bands tried to divert the focus, muttering, "Let's keep the child out of this." Mamdani responded immediately, "You want to protect the child? Then stop using him as a power accessory." The room exploded, microphones turned on. The official broadcast was unexpectedly cut off for more than 3 minutes. Viewers thought it was a technical glitch until someone leaked the raw footage online. Eric Adams' name was censored twice. The file Mamdani referenced was marked for national security review hours later, but the damage had already spread. That night, the networks broke audience records. Newsrooms rushed to verify the identity behind Mamdani, but he didn't back down. When a reporter asked him in the hallway if he feared retaliation, his response was as cold as it was clear. "No, because I didn't say anything I can't back up." The session resumed 22 minutes later, but there was no real debate. The room didn't discuss, it swayed. Some advisors avoided looking him in the eye, others simply left the building. But what no one saw, neither on C-SPAN nor in the headlines, was that Mamdani received a message on his private phone just as he returned to his office. One word. Finally, while the hearing fell silent, the White House was far from it. In the West Wing, a young assistant had just spilled her iced coffee on a printer, but no one noticed. Everyone had their eyes fixed on the TV without sound, anchored in the corner of the Roosevelt Room. Zohran Mamdani was still in the middle of his speech, and the silence in the room wasn't just for the broadcast, it was for what they knew could come next. Across the hall, Chief of Staff Brian Halford was frozen in front of the screen. He didn't blink. The mayor had just finished a business meeting and was walking half distracted, gesturing to silence an advisor talking about agricultural tariffs in Kansas. Then he saw Mamdani's face on the screen. "What is this?" he asked, pointing at the TV as he entered. Why is this on all the channels? No one responded quickly enough. Adams turned to Halford. Brian, what the hell is going on? Halford opened his mouth, then closed it again. Sir, he mentioned sealed files about Barron. Adams' face froze in that expression between a smile and fury, the one he showed when he didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. What? The room counted the breaths. Someone cleared their throat in the corner. Another advisor slowly reached for the remote. Don't touch that, Adams snapped. He stepped closer to the TV, squinting just as Mamdani was saying the word paternity. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then Adams turned around and barked. Get me the network right now. I want to talk to, what's his name? Peterman from CNN. A staffer ran to make the call. Halford stepped forward cautiously. Sir, maybe we should be strategic about this. Strategic, Adams growled. He just said on live TV that Barron isn't my son, and you want strategy? He grabbed his phone from the table and called his personal attorney, Hope Sinclair, on speakerphone. She can't say that. It's defamation. I want a statement. We're suing. We're suing CNN. We're suing everyone. Hope responded with her usual calm voice. Sir, defamation doesn't apply if it turns out to be true. The silence from Adams gave the answer to everyone in the room. Halford intervened. We don't know what he has, but we do know this. It's out. All the media have spread it. It's trending. On TikTok, there are clips from 4 different angles. Adams' hand trembled. He didn't even try to hide it. He turned up the volume just in time to hear Mamdani's final statement. If the mayor knew during his first term that Barron Adams wasn't biologically his, and buried that information to protect his image, we have a problem that's not just legal, it's moral. Adams threw the remote against the wall. It's shattered. This is all because of that damn agreement, he muttered. You know, don't you? Eric Adams nodded slightly, but he wasn't listening to strategy anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere darker, that smelled like a hotel room in Washington in 2005, with a woman crying who had signed her name with an X. Back then, he just wanted to win. A woman spoke, he paid, everything disappeared. Until now. Tell the networks I'm going live in 30 minutes. Sir, I said 30. But before the cameras even had time to warm up, Twitter had already crowned Zohran Mamdani as the voice of the moment. In a gas station parking lot on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio, Laura Peak, 42, had just filled her tank when she looked at her phone and saw an alert from APE. Representative Zohran Mamdani launches an explosive accusation about Mayor Eric Adams' marriage, Liv. Normally she wouldn't click on such headlines, but something in this one, something in Mamdani's calmness, stopped her in her tracks. She hit play. The low-quality clip started loading inside the store. The cashier was watching it too. CNN blared loudly from a small flat screen behind the cigarette counter. When Mamdani said the word paternity, Laura stopped breathing. In Seattle, Denzel Jades, 19, watched it from the break room at the Apple store where he worked. His coworker Dan stopped mid-bite from his reheated Thai food. Wait, she's saying Adams isn't the father? She didn't say it, Denzel replied. She proved it. Clips had already spread across TikTok. The live broadcast had surpassed 2.3 million views in less than an hour. A slow-motion version highlighted Mamdani's hand holding the affidavit tightly. Another cut to Eric Adams' stunned face at an old rally, dramatically folded. By 4 p.m., the hashtag #MamdaniTruth was trending worldwide, right beneath #CrockettTruth. Across the country, everyone had a different theory. In a high school cafeteria in Mesa, Arizona, a third-year student named Waken was debating with his history teacher. Does this even matter? He asked. Is it personal life? Professor Roach shook her head. If the documents are real, it's not just personal. It's a betrayal of public trust. If you hide something this big, you don't stop there, said Professor Roach. In rural Pennsylvania, a retired Marine named Cal was watching Fox News in his study. The anchor looked nervous. The channel hadn't cut off the broadcast, but the tone was softening. Even in one of Trump's strongest bastions, questions began to emerge. What if it's true? Whispered his wife, Teresa. Cal didn't respond. Outside a barbershop in Tallahassee, phones were being passed hand to hand. A man in a Raptor shirt asked, Do you think she made this up? The barber slowly shook his head. No, that woman didn't flinch. Did you see her face? She's been waiting for this moment. Within hours, the opinion polls shifted. A flash poll from Data Pulse asked, do you believe Zohran Mamdani's claim about Mayor Eric Adams and Barron Adams? Yes, 48%. No, 33%. Not sure. For a country known for its polarization, that was a landslide. CNN repeated the footage every hour. MSNBC called in legal analysts. Even Newsmax had to recognize the stir, although they tried to present it as a political ambush. But on TikTok and Instagram, Mamdani's image was being reconfigured in real time. Edits showed his face merged with those of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Shirley Chisholm. One post simply said, he said it on camera in front of everyone and didn't blink. Meanwhile, Eric Adams' live broadcast was delayed twice. Behind the scenes, his team debated his public image. Acknowledging the accusation would worsen it. Ignoring it would seem weak. His press secretary released a dull statement pre-written in advance, accusing Representative Mamdani of reckless character assassination. But even that barely echoed because now the attention wasn't just on the accusation, it was on why Mamdani chose to say it now. Some said it was calculated, others that it was impulsive. But the real conversation wasn't about the timing, it was about the truth. In a podcast recorded that night in Milwaukee, two college students dissected everything for their Gen Z audience. Look, said host Bianca Ford, if she's lying, she's finished. But if she's not lying, it means the mayor used his power to hide the identity of a child from the public for years. That's not gossip, that's corruption. Calls began flooding radio programs. Grandparents debated it at the kitchen table. Teenagers filmed their reactions in the car. Some called it brave, others disgusting. Some simply couldn't stop watching it over and over again. And yet, amid all of this, Zohran Mamdani didn't make any further statements. No press release, no press conference, just a tweet posted at 8:12 p.m. The truth has its way of coming out when it's ready. But while Mamdani stayed calm, the White House was anything but, and panic was about to become public. It was almost 9:30 p.m. when Zohran Mamdani entered the CNN studio in downtown Washington, D.C., looking as though he hadn't slept, but also as though sleep could wait. No entourage, no ostentatious jewelry, just a navy blazer, a neat ponytail, and a folder firmly held under his arm. Inside the studio, producers were running back and forth. This wasn't supposed to be live that night, but ratings were through the roof, and Anderson Pike was already sitting, reviewing last-minute notes with the urgency of someone about to conduct the most-watched interview of the year. Representative Mamdani, he said, standing up with a stiff smile, we appreciate you taking the time. Mamdani nodded calmly. I won't take long, I just want to set things straight. When they went live, there was no intro music, no slick transitions, just his face centered with a firm gaze. Pike tried to soften the entrance. You've caused a political earthquake today, Representative. Some say you crossed a line, others say you revealed what many feared to even touch. Can you explain why today was the day? Mamdani took a second. Because I wasn't elected to protect the secrets of a man, he said. I was elected to protect the people's right to the truth, even when that truth makes them uncomfortable. Pike looked at his notes. You mentioned sealed documents and a supposed payment related to the birth of Barron Adams. Do you have those files? I've seen them, he replied. I have access through a whistleblower who requested anonymity for obvious reasons. I'm working with legal advisors to determine what can be made public without compromising their safety. And to be clear, Pike continued cautiously, you're stating on national television that you believe Mayor Adams deliberately suppressed the truth about Barron's paternity to protect his public image? Mamdani leaned forward. I'm saying that all the evidence I've reviewed strongly supports that conclusion. I'm also saying his administration used the government apparatus, threats of confidentiality agreements, legal maneuvers, and secret payments to keep it buried. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically monitoring social media. The channel's app was crashing from the traffic. They hadn't seen numbers like this since election night 2020. Pike looked visibly tense. You know the implications of this, Representative. I'm not wrong, Mamdani interrupted. Silence. He tried to change course. Many critics say this exposes a minor child to public fire, that it's unfair to Barron Adams. Mamdani nodded gravely. I agree, it's unfair, but I didn't put him there. His father did. When you lied to the country to keep your house in order, the roof that collapses isn't mine, it's yours. His voice didn't rise. He didn't need it. Pike insisted. Do you think this revelation changes the course of the election? No, he replied. I think it changes how we look at character, and that's more important. He wasn't losing control. He wasn't improvising. He looked like someone who knew much more than he was letting on. That scared them. The CNN clip was uploaded in minutes. Within an hour, it had over 12 million views. A journalist from the Baltimore Leader tweeted, "Whether you believe her or not, Zohran Mamdani came to the fight with evidence and his back straight. This wasn't a leak, it was a warning." By midnight, other representatives were being asked where they stood. Half refused to comment. Some tried to dodge the question, but one representative, Lynette Ocon from Oregon, surprised everyone. I've seen parts of what Representative Mamdani mentioned, she told a local news outlet, and I believe he's telling the truth. That phrase triggered another explosion online because now it wasn't just Zohran, someone else had seen it too. Meanwhile, Mamdani had returned to his apartment in Arlington. He didn't answer any more calls, didn't update Twitter, just sat on his couch, still wearing his shoes, staring at the folder in front of him. Inside were the rest of the documents, some he hadn't mentioned yet, some he hoped he wouldn't have to show. But if pressed, he was ready. But while Mamdani stayed silent, the woman at the center of the story was being dragged into the spotlight she never asked for. In a quiet corner of Saratoga, California, Genevieve Larson, 51, arrived home just after 6 in the evening, still dressed in her blue nurse's uniform from her night shift. She hadn't even turned off the engine when her neighbor came rushing down the path with the phone in hand. You need to see this, she said breathlessly. Genevieve squinted at the screen. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Just a clip of Zohran Mamdani while he's sitting upright in a studio, his voice firm. Serena, a woman under the alias TV. Genevieve's chest tightened. That alias wasn't random. It was her. Talia Breyer, the name she had used in court, buried under a protective order she had hoped would never come to light. And now it was national. Inside her house, Genevieve locked the door, drew the curtains, and turned on the disposable phone she had kept hidden in an old coffee tin under the sink. It hadn't rung in over 4 years, but that morning, there were 4 missed calls and 1 voicemail. The voice she heard was from her lawyer. Genevieve, I know you've seen it. Don't respond to anything. I'm on the next flight. We knew this day could come. Just wait. Her hands trembled as she sat down at the kitchen table. The silence around her was deafening. Her son was in college, and for the first time in years, she wished he weren't. Not because she needed protection, but because she didn't want to face this alone. By noon, her name still hadn't been released, but the vultures were already circling. Paparazzi were parked 2 blocks away. Someone tried to pose as a delivery driver. Another slid a note under the garage door. We know who you are. Talk to us first. Name your price. She didn't respond. Not yet. Her mind drifted back to a hotel suite in Phoenix, where it all began. She had been a surgical tech, young, ambitious, still believing in second chances. She met Adams at a charity dinner through a friend of a friend. He wasn't charming, not really, but he was persuasive, confident. He made you feel like saying no would be the biggest mistake of your life. 8 months later, she had a baby and a secret that could destroy it all. She told him at first. He dismissed her. I'm not that kind of guy, he said with a smirk. Then came the lawyers and the agreement. He never signed the birth certificate, but he signed the check in the confidentiality agreement. Genevieve used the money to start over. New city, new name, new life. It almost worked until Zohran Mamdani said her name without saying it. Across the country, Mamdani's team had already made contact. A secure line, no pressure, just a warning. Journalists were digging. Someone from a DC outlet had already narrowed the search down to 5 women. They were all receiving calls, and Genevieve knew it. It was only a matter of time. Her lawyer, Harry Snowen, landed in Oakland by mid-afternoon and went straight to her house. They're going to try to break you, he said, sitting across from her at the same kitchen table where she used to make school lunches. I know, she replied quietly. But I don't owe them anything. She looked him in the eye. But I do owe her something. To Mamdani. He nodded. Genev stood, went to the cupboard, and pulled out a red folder. Inside were copies of the original lawsuit, emails from Adams' legal team, proof of the paternity test request he never responded to. I don't want to go on TV, she said. I don't want interviews. I just want the truth to be known. Harris studied her closely. Then we'll do it on your terms. A written statement through the Ledger or the Guardian, somewhere that won't twist it. She nodded. And I want them to know that I didn't ask for this, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. By nightfall, Genev's name still hadn't leaked, but the right people already knew exactly who she was. A journalist from the Washington Post sent a comment request to 7:02 p.m. 10 minutes later, another message came through. We know you're the woman Zohran Mamdani referred to. I'd like to hear your side before someone else writes it for you. Genev closed her laptop. She would decide tomorrow. But just as she was regaining her composure, a veteran journalist on the other side of the country was about to stumble upon a clue no one else had noticed yet. In a cramped newsroom in downtown St. Louis, veteran journalist Conrad Wells stared at his monitor, blinking against the harsh blue light. He wasn't young or flashy, and he definitely didn't belong to the digital crowd chasing viral headlines. But when the Mamdani case exploded, something shook him. No, not the drama. He'd seen enough of that. What caught his attention was the silence between the noise, the parts that no one was pursuing. He leaned back in his squeaky chair, cracked his knuckles, and opened a folder on his desk titled Pattern NDT 2017. Conrad had covered Adams for years, but not like the news networks did. He watched patterns, payments, real estate records, offshore trusts. After Mamdani's statement, he remembered something strange he had marked 5 years ago. A bank transfer from a Trump-linked ghost company to an Arizona-based LLC called Red Lantern Diagnostics. No one cared at the time. It was small, buried in a quarterly report, but now he quickly wrote down Red Lantern Diagnostics, Arizona, paternity, medical tests, court records, 21. A public record from Maricopa County surfaced. Most of it was sealed, but the file showed a lawsuit filed under the initials TV against Shodayadete, John Donald Adams. There was no ruling attached, only a withdrawal of the lawsuit and a notice of private resolution. Conrad sat up straight. He called an old court employee who owed him 2 favors. 30 minutes later, she whispered on the phone, "There's an affidavit attached, sealed 3 hours after it was filed." "You're not the first to ask about it today," she hesitated. "Who else?" Conrad asked. "Private lawyers, not press," she noted. By now, Mamdani's team had remained silent, strategic, smart, but that didn't mean Conrad couldn't find the edges. Conrad called a contact at a medical courier service based in Tempe. They used to work with private labs. In 2019, one of their drivers had logged a pickup at an address matching Red Lantern Diagnostics. Destination, Washington, D.C., night delivery. Sender, Genev Larkson. There it was. He didn't publish it, not yet, but now he knew. Mamdani hadn't launched a theory. He had a foundation, and possibly the documents to back it up. By the end of the day, Conrad had a name, a timeline, a money trail, and an angle no other outlet had. He sent an email directly to Mamdani's office. No flowery language, just one line. "I know about Red Lantern. If this is real, it's more than a scandal. It's systemic abuse of power. I don't seek to be the first. I seek to be right." 1 hour later, he received a response. "We're listening." It was brief, but it told him everything. They weren't improvising. They were preparing. Still, the truth wasn't just in D.C. Yes, he began reviewing FIFEC records, searching for legal reimbursements filed under terms like consultancy or discretionary services. He found 3 cases, all from mid-2020, labeled as legal risk mitigation. 2 were linked to well-known firms. The third was linked to a small Arizona firm called Goland and Associates, Genev's lawyer's office. Everything fit. At 10:17 p.m., Conrad sat at his desk, opened a lukewarm can of Dr. Pepper, and started writing the first draft of what would become the most read article of his career. He didn't start with the child, he didn't start with the money, he started with the silence. In a democracy, secrets corrode us from within. This isn't about a scandal. It's about a government machinery built to bury those it fears. He filed it under embargo, waiting for approval from the legal department. But deep down, he knew the dam was already cracking. What Mamdani had started wasn't a trick. It was a spark. By morning, the lit fuse would cross every newsroom in the country. But just as Conrad was preparing to publish, the White House was struggling to prevent its inner circle from turning against it. And things were about to get even more chaotic. At 7:45 a.m., the West Wing was flooded with damage control operations. Legal advisors rushed between offices, phones glued to their ears. Some employees were working overnight shifts, too nervous to even change their clothes. The whiteboard in the press office had been erased, refilled, and erased again. No one knew which strategy would last more than 10 minutes. Mayor Adams hadn't spoken publicly since Mamdani's hearing, but inside the walls of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, silence was nowhere to be found. In the Roosevelt room, he paced back and forth in a worn red tie, his hair slightly disheveled, yelling into the speakerphone. "Find out who that woman is, the one Mamdani mentioned. I want her whole history, school, work, everything." An assistant responded from the other end of the line. "Sir, we believe her name is Genevieve Larkson. She legally changed her name in 2010. There's a sealed court record." "I don't care about the court," Adams growled. "I care about the story. Find her and discredit her." Hope Sinclair, his legal advisor, exchanged a glance with Brian Halford across the room. Even they were beginning to wonder if this situation could really be contained, because it wasn't just about one woman anymore. It was about the machinery built to protect an illusion. Behind closed doors, the communications team was falling apart. A young speechwriter broke down in tears after Hope Sinclair shouted at her for suggesting they admit a slight error in judgment. Another assistant spilled coffee on her notes while printing a statement that never made it to press. No one knew who was making the final decisions anymore. Adams changed his mind every hour, and then came the leak. At 8:13 p.m., a clip appeared on a private Discord news server, and minutes later it landed on Reddit. It was a muffled but unmistakable audio clip. The voice of Hope Sinclair. "If the affidavit leaks, we're exposed. We can't justify avoiding a paternity test." The clip spread like wildfire. Cable news hosts scrambled to verify it. It was raw, unconfirmed, but voice analysts matched it to public recordings in less than an hour. The timeline also matched. Later that morning, a Fox reporter cornered Sinclair in a hallway. She didn't deny it, she just kept walking. Inside the Oval Office, Adams was crumbling. "She recorded me," he murmured. "No, sir," Halford whispered. "She recorded herself, probably in a call." "Same thing," Adams growled. Halford didn't respond. At 1:05 p.m., Adams held a private video call with First Lady Melania Adams, who was still in Geneva attending a summit on youth welfare. Her face was calm but distant. "You said it was resolved," she said softly. "It was resolved," he replied, "until that woman came back." Melania didn't flinch. "You should have told me the whole story, not just fragments." Adams' voice softened. "This doesn't have to change anything. Barron is still our son." She blinked, her lips tight. "No, Donald, he's my son." The call ended shortly after. Back in the press room, reporters swarmed like sharks. The questions never stopped. Has the president seen the affidavit that Zohran Mamdani referred to? Was a DNA test done by Eric Adams in 2019? Did the administration suppress court records through internal influence? The press secretary tried to hold firm with a pre-written statement. The president categorically denies all false claims regarding his family and considers these attacks a shameful attempt to gain political points. It didn't work because now even those inside were talking. A mid-level staffer anonymously told the Philadelphia Review, "We knew about the Red Lantern file since 2020. It was kept in the top right drawer of Halford's filing cabinet. Anyone who asked was told to focus on the campaign." When the article came out by noon, Twitter exploded again. People weren't just reacting, they were taking sides. Even in conservative circles, quiet conversations began to emerge. Republican strategist Janelle LaCriston spoke to PBS saying, "This is no longer about parties. It's about how power has been protected with lies. If Mamdani's claims hold up, We need to face it head on. Inside the White House, the circle of trust was shrinking more and more. Hope Sinclair was already drafting her resignation letter. Halford had stopped answering press calls altogether. The only person still trying to keep everything together was Adams himself. And even he was showing cracks, shouting orders, demanding loyalty. But now, people weren't just nodding, they were doubting, because the truth had started to leak, and there was no way to stuff it back into the cracks. But the biggest crack wasn't in the walls of the White House. It was buried in a judge's drawer in Phoenix, and the file inside was about to come to light. Inside the White House, the walls were shaking again. Hope Sinclair was no longer there. Brian Halford was locked in a room with Mayor Eric Adams, trying to explain how a 5-year-old memo from a small court in Arizona had become national front-page news. Adams was no longer shouting, he was silent. Too silent. "How did they get that memo?" he asked, staring at the floor. "They didn't get it," Halford replied. "Someone leaked it. The actuary, a lawyer, maybe the judge." Adams growled. "She promised to keep it sealed." Halford didn't remind him that promises mean little when the truth is staring a judge in the face during her final weeks on the bench. Across the country, the mood began to shift. It was no longer a distant scandal. It was messy, human, painfully real. People started to wonder, if there's nothing to hide, why not just take the test? In a Tulsa hair salon, a woman having her braids done murmured, "It's always the lies that sink them, not the act, the lies." In Minneapolis, a college student tweeted, "I don't care who the father is, I care that the mayor used the judicial system like his personal closet to hide things." Even some conservative voices began to crack. A retired Republican strategist said live on the radio, "I'm not saying it's true, but the way they're dodging this doesn't look good. Silence speaks louder than the accusation." Meanwhile, Judge Vetterari made one final call to Zohran Mamdani's office. There was no voicemail or secretary. She was transferred directly to the congressman. "Congressman Mamdani," said the judge, "this is Rosanna Vetterari. I have something you might want to see." But as Mamdani prepared for what was to come, Americans from coast to coast were getting ready to take sides, not just politically, but morally. By the time the Arizona judicial memo was read live on Good Morning America, the country wasn't just watching the news, it was living it. In a restaurant in Des Moines, Iowa, the usual morning chat about the weather and corn futures was replaced by heated discussions about truth, loyalty, and what it means to be deceived by the most powerful man in the nation. 2 months later, an elderly couple was arguing with a young man in a Carhartt hoodie. "I don't care who fathered that kid," the elderly man murmured while stirring his coffee. "This smells like a smear campaign." The young man leaned forward. "Do you really think he didn't block the test? There's proof. Sealed files, confidentiality agreements. The whole mess. He ran from the truth like he runs from everything else." In southern Mobile, Alabama, a church parking lot turned into an impromptu debate stage. Pastor Carl Denson had just finished his morning prayer when he received a message from a deacon. "Turn on the TV." When he did, Mamdani's face filled the screen again, this time walking up the Capitol stairs, flanked by 2 assistants, with a manila folder in hand. By 10 p.m., Washington Ledger reported that a federal motion had been filed to unseal additional documents referenced by Mamdani's team. The language in the motion was surgical. This issue now falls under national interest. The suppression of truth under the guise of executive privilege constitutes a violation of ethical governance. The response from voters was swift. Some districts saw spontaneous protests. People with handmade signs demanding transparency stood in front of state capitals in Utah, Missouri, and Pennsylvania. But the reaction wasn't one-sided. In Birmingham, a pro-Adams rally formed outside a local news station after it aired the memo headline. A woman in a sequined blouse with the flag screamed into a megaphone. "This is what they do when they can't win at the polls. They attack the family." Across town, half an hour later, a college group held a silent march with signs reading, "Truth before image," and "We deserve honest leaders." In cafeterias, classrooms, jobs, and buses, people were choosing sides. Meanwhile, in Gary, Indiana, a single mother named Patrice Kinley sat on the couch with her 15-year-old daughter, both watching the news as it unfolded in their living room. "Why didn't they just take the test?" the girl asked softly. Patrice shook her head. Sweetheart, when someone lies enough, even the truth starts to seem like a threat. In Philadelphia, university professor Hugo Brenn organized an open forum in his American ethics class. He wrote a single question on the board: does personal truth matter in public service? What followed were 3 hours of the rawest, most honest conversation he had witnessed in years. One student cried, another stormed out of the room. Mamdani, for his part, hadn't spoken since Judge Vetterari's call. He was preparing not just legally, but emotionally. Because this wasn't just a political revelation, it was a question about how America sees its leaders, and if that vision was ever real. In a public forum in Bakersfield, California, Representative Lynette Ocon faced her own storm. A conservative voter stood up and shouted, "You're destroying this country with gossip." She didn't raise her voice. She simply responded with a question. Is it gossip if it's documented in a court file? He didn't answer. Even international media took the story. A British broadcaster called it the most pivotal paternity issue since Jefferson. In Canada, late-night comedians walked the thin line between satire and awe. And in Brazil, a journalist simply said, "In America, power fears the truth more than defeat." But back in Washington, something else was changing. The poll numbers. A new poll showed that Mamdani's positive image had risen by 18 points among independents, especially those under 40. Adams' base remained solid, but undecided voters were starting to lean toward what was now being called the faction of honesty. And though Mamdani didn't hold a press conference, his team confirmed one thing to Columbus Gerald. The envelope from Judge Vetterari was already in their possession. On social media, the reaction was immediate. "She's not done. She's just reloading for the next shot." In a Facebook group for political science students, one comment stood out. Mamdani isn't bringing them down with noise, he's bringing them down with documentation. But this was no longer just about Adams. It was about how America, as a nation, responds when the truth is no longer whispered, but read aloud with proof in hand. And while the entire country stayed glued to their screens, Mamdani's final move was preparing. One destined to close the chapter with clarity, leaving no room for interpretation. Just minutes past 3 p.m., Zohran Mamdani stepped out of a silver sedan and walked toward the press podium in front of the Capitol. No TV crew had been notified. There were no barricades, no media access wristbands, just a few dozen reporters who had been waiting since early morning, guided by a single rumor. She's going to speak. He didn't bring advisors, dark glasses, or a lawyer by his side. Just the same manila folder everyone had seen him holding that morning when he entered the building. When he stood behind the microphone, the noise stopped. "My name is Zohran Mamdani," he said, "and I'm not here to repeat myself. I'm here to end the assumptions." He pulled out a single sheet from the folder and held it up. "This is the original 2019 paternity test order, filed under seal by a state court. It was never fulfilled. It was never challenged in an open court. It was just buried." Cameras started firing and reporters leaned forward. "What you've heard these last few days isn't a theory. It's not drama. It's not political theater. That's a file. One the American people should have seen years ago." Someone yelled at him, "Congressman, are you going to release the full affidavit?" He paused. "I will submit it to the House Ethics Committee, the Department of Justice, and the Public Records Office. I will not edit it. I won't hide behind legal games." Another reporter asked, "Are you worried this could backfire politically?" He gave a slight smile. "The truth doesn't backfire, it just burns where it needs to burn." The room fell silent again. That night, the files were published in full by multiple media outlets. No paywalls, no embellishments, just the documents. The affidavit, the missed hearings, the financial settlement, payment history, and the internal memo confirming that Adams' legal team advised evasion at all costs. It was no longer debatable. Not only had he hidden it, he buried it under influence and money. That night, CNN aired a special titled "The Truth Test," what Mamdani's follows reveal about power and protection. MSNBC followed with "The Price of Image," how silence served the presidency. Even Fox News, pressured by internal leaks, reluctantly held a debate on whether Adams' denials were still credible. Across the country, the impact went deeper than clicks. In Lincoln, Nebraska, a high school civics teacher rewrote his lesson plan after a student asked, "Can a president lie and still be a good leader?" In Las Vegas, a Republican councilwoman announced she was stepping down from her campaign committee, saying, "I can't ask others to support a man who ran from a test my husband would have passed without blinking." In Baltimore, Genevieve Larkson finally spoke. She published a 2-page letter to the press. No cameras, no interviews, just words. "I didn't ask for this spotlight," wrote Genevieve Larkson, "but I no longer feel shame. I kept quiet because I thought silence would protect my son. But I've learned that silence only protects the wrong people. I thank Congresswoman Mamdani for doing what I couldn't." Her son, now in college, also issued a brief statement. "My mom told the truth. That's all that matters." And still, Zohran Mamdani didn't capitalize on the moment, didn't release a book, didn't ride the wave. He went back to work, presenting 2 new bills to the House within a week. One to limit executive interference in state court cases and another to create legal pathways to review sealed agreements involving public officials. None were immediately passed, but they were recorded in Daylight Ink. And for many Americans, that meant something. For Adams, the damage was permanent. His legal team tried to spin another narrative, but donors began pulling away. Independent voters turned away. Even close members of his circle, like Sinclair and Halford, began cooperating with oversight committees. Privately, a senior advisor was heard saying, "It wasn't Mamdani who did this to him. He did it to himself. She just told the story he tried to erase." And as for Mamdani, he never said, "I told you so." He just kept showing up, because that's what this was always about. It wasn't about proving someone lied. It was about proving that even in the most protected halls of power, the truth could still find its way out. If anyone had the courage to stand while the world shook, and as the camera faded from their last appearance before the press, their words were etched forever. "Your image is what you show. Your truth is what you live. And I didn't come to Congress to protect images. I came to honor the truth." If this story meant something to you, if it made you think, reflect, or even reconsider, subscribe for more. The stories we tell shape the world we live in. Let's tell the right ones.